Our next guest is no stranger to defending life and the courage and determination you need to be a voice for life in the years ahead. She is actually from the UK, where she has been arrested twice now for this, for silently praying. Does that make any sense to you? I cannot wait for you to meet her, hear her story. She was silently praying outside of an abortion facility and got arrested for it. So let's hear from her from across the pond, Isabel Vaughan Spruce.
Thank you so much for such an amazingly warm welcome. I was brought up pro-life like many of you, but having said that, I think it's the most natural thing in the world to be pro-life, to care about babies. That's the default position for any child, unless and until they're taught otherwise. And I'm grateful that I was never taught to dehumanize the preborn child. It wasn't until my teens, though, that this belief really meant something to me personally. As a teenager, I loved reading war stories. Although you'd see the depths of evil that humanity could sink to, you'd also see heroism at its finest. And as you do when you're reading a book, I placed myself in those incredibly challenging situations, and I'd ask myself the question, what would I have done if I'd been back then? Would I have had the conviction to say anything? Would I have had the courage to do anything? And I gradually realized I was asking the wrong question. The only way of finding out what I would have done back then is to ask myself, what am I doing now? There's a battle going on. What am I doing about it? I realized that the word pro-life couldn't just be a label or a tag that I gave myself. It had to be something I lived out. In fact, I sometimes say that the only way to find out if it's more than a label is to ask yourself, if it became illegal tomorrow to be pro-life, would there be enough evidence to convict you? And so I began to look for ways to live out my pro-life beliefs. This eventually led me to joining a handful of people who for many years had been praying outside an abortion centre for an hour a week on a Saturday morning in Birmingham, England. On joining them, I had a real sense of this is where I belonged. So after a few years, I started a 40 Days for Life campaign there, which helped hundreds of women and couples and really solidified the pro-life community. After many more years, that abortion centre miraculously closed down. And I say miraculously, as it was the fourth busiest abortion centre in the country, and it was closing, not just moving. We asked the manageress, why was it closing? And she seemed unable to answer and shrugged, saying, things change. But we knew the reason why: prayer. And so we moved to another abortion centre in Birmingham, but we weren't received well by many of the locals. We were screamed at, sworn at, spat at, threatened. We had cars drive down the road towards us at high speed and veer away at the last second. We had property stolen, and we were even physically assaulted. When one of these assaults was caught on camera and shown to the police, the response I received was, well, if you don't want to be assaulted, you don't have to come out of your house, do you? In fact, the local police worked with the local council, residents, and abortion centre staff to bring in what's called a PSPO, a Public Space Protection Order, or a local buffer zone, which bans protesting around the abortion centre. So I got my 40 Days for Life volunteers to pray outside the zone. And just to say, they were still shouted at, sworn at, spat at, assaulted, etc. So it was clear that no one was really trying to stick up for women who they believed were harassed. It was more to do with an intolerance of any ideology that was different to their own, coupled with a sense of empowerment, of being above the law, which it seemed that they were. And in this atmosphere, I internally reasoned, okay, buffer zones ban protesting, but I've never protested outside abortion centres. I pray there and I offer help. Surely my prayers can't be censored. So I went to silently pray outside the closed abortion centre. No posters, no leaflets, no Bible, no rosary beads. Just me standing there by myself, not making a sound. The police arrived very quickly and asked if I was protesting. I said I wasn't, and they asked if I was praying. And I said I might be silently praying in my head, but nothing out loud. This prompted them to arrest me. I was searched very thoroughly on the street and taken to a police station, locked in a cell for a few hours before being interrogated under caution as to what had been going on in my head. I was released on bail and charged with engaging in an act which was intimidating service users. And I remind you, the abortion centre had been closed. There were no service users. So I went to court, supported by ADF, and was acquitted within minutes. So I reasoned that everyone now recognized I was allowed to pray silently on the street. And a couple of weeks later, I went back to exactly the same spot and did exactly the same thing, i.e., I silently prayed near the abortion centre. This time, 6 police officers arrived in a police van and told me my prayers were an offence. When I stated that I didn't believe prayer was offensive, they became more emphatic and said it was an offence and arrested me. They took me away in a police van to the police station and placed me in a cell again. I was eventually released on bail, investigated for 6 months, after which eventually the charges were dropped. I continue to go outside the abortion centre every week, and the police have continued to come out, giving me various tickets, telling me I'll be issued with fixed penalty notices. And in the meantime, we've had national buffer zones voted in by our government. So there will be some kind of exclusion zone around every abortion centre in our country very soon. Now, this could all sound a little bit hopeless, but times like this remind me of a story I once heard about a personal hero of mine, Maximilian Kolbe. Maximilian Kolbe is very well known as a priest who gave his life for a fellow prisoner at Auschwitz. But there's another story about him that's not so well known. It's told by a fellow prisoner at Auschwitz. And this man said that when he arrived at the death camp, it was as if his hope died at the gates. He could see the emaciated faces. He could smell the smoke of the burning human flesh coming from the chimneys. And he thought he was never going to see freedom again. And one day he described how he was walking between the blocks that housed the men, and he was feeling very low, very discouraged. Towards him walked Maximilian Kolbe. And as if reading what was inside him, Maximilian Kolbe walked up to him, placed his hand on his shoulder, looked him in the eye, and said, "Hope. Never give up on hope." And that started a spark inside this man. And he went back to the block where he was housed with the other men, and together they hatched a plan to break into the German officers' quarters, to steal their uniforms and dress up as German soldiers, to take the keys to the commandant's car, and to drive out of the gates of Auschwitz in what was one of the most successful and daring escapes in the history of Auschwitz. And I can imagine afterwards people congratulating this man on his ingenuity and his courage, and rightly so. But it didn't start with him. It started with Maximilian Kolbe, who gave him back his hope. He didn't let his circumstances dictate to him. He dictated hope, no matter what. And that's our job. Whether we're talking with women or couples who are struggling in pregnancy, those who've been through an abortion or multiple abortions, those who've worked in the abortion industry, those who say they're pro-life but feel overwhelmed by fear or the size of the task to get involved, or those who work alongside us but are experiencing some battle fatigue. If we want to provide any influence in these situations, we must first become people of hope. He who holds the most hope holds the most influence. And I'm not talking about the kind of hope that says, I do hope things improve. but a hope that truly believes they will, because it's a sure hope founded on our Savior, Jesus Christ.